Hey, you're listening to The Morning Show with Aaron, and in the studio I have a man called Pete Delete. Good morning, Pete.
Good morning, sir. Lovely to be here.
I nearly called you Pete the Delete, which would be wrong.
I've been called a lot worse.
You've been
called Yeah.
So Pete is a poet, and he's just coming through. You're just on your way through Raglan, really, at the moment,
I
aren't you?
am. I will be coming in a lot more. I'm on my way back to Hot Water Beach, where I'm sort of based, loosely based.
Yeah.
And then on to London for family, and then a 6-week poetry tour of Cornwall, where I learned to surf 40 years ago.
Okay. And so you were...
Tax deductible surf trip.
Very good.
Sorry.
This is what everyone in Raglan wants. No, they'll be pleased to hear that there is such a thing.
Yeah.
So you've just been in the Taranaki. Were you performing down there?
Not so much this time. I did a few little gigs, but I went there to pick up 2 books from my publisher. I've self-published.
Okay.
And yeah, it's exciting. So this week's my first week as a full-time peripatetic poet.
So we were talking about off the air. Neither of us are entirely sure what that word means, but I've read it before, and we concluded it was a compliment.
Yeah, a writer from New York told me I am that. And travelling, doesn't stay in one place long, philosopher. That's sort of the explanation he gave me, so I'll take that.
You take that.
Yeah.
So the books are these 2 books, two
Yeah.
books that you've written
Yeah.
of poetry, obviously.
Yeah, one's a children's book called The World Through the Eyes of a Child. It's more for the adults reading it to children to make them aware of the potential of these children, and so they don't damage that, as normally happens.
Yeah.
And the other one is called The Word Least Spoken.
Yeah. And that's a more conventional
There's
poetry.
nothing conventional about it, I promise you that. But,
so it's not just each page there's a different poem?
No, what it's 10 years ago I had a dream, and in the dream it told me to buy a laptop and go to Auckland Airport, and incredible synchronicities took me around the world, and I'd never written a thing in my life of any consequence, and I got as far as New York, and just suddenly these words just started to float into my soft cloud of a mind, and it was called The Tree of Life.
Okay.
And it blew my mind, what was coming through me, you know. It was.
Do you know where it came from?
I do now. Didn't know then. I knew it wasn't me. But,
okay.
No, that's been the journey, you know.
I've heard creative people say that they're like, I don't want to use the word channel because people get all woo-woo about the word channel, but something for the creative force comes through.
Yeah, at that time I'd unblocked my fearful mind, and there was just nothing there. I'd learned to live without thought, and I'd observe what came.
Yeah.
And if it was an original thought, I'd acted on it. If it was an old pattern, I would just delete it. So that's where the Pete Delete comes from.
Okay.
Deleting my past programming.
Yeah. So you've got a bit of a story to tell, because you have lived in Raglan at one point. When did you live in Raglan?
So, well, I first came here in 81 as a 21-year-old.
Okay.
On a surf trip, and
I bet it was different back then.
Very different. I ended up, the bus dropped me off at the library, and I couldn't find where the surf was. So there wasn't many cars around. A lady with a surfboard on a roof took me out to the point, dropped me off at Whale Bay, and there was 3 surfers out.
Oh, yeah.
And when they come in, 2 surfers. I was the third. And they showed me an old tin shed in the trees, and they said it's where everyone stays. Apparently a doctor owned it somewhere, and I stayed there.
Right.
And there was a book in there of people's stoned trips, and pictures and I hope it should be in a museum. It's amazing. But anyway, so that was the start. But about 10 years ago, I lived in my car in the hills behind Raglan, hiding away from the mental health system, trying to get away from their poisons, and just dwell in my depression and work through it. So that was the start of my journey.
Did many people know you were there? Like many people locally?
No, nobody knew.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, I just I just stayed there, and I was close to death pretty much. But I'd read a book called Into the Wild about a young American, it's a true story, young American gentleman that travelled, got out of his programming and travelled America, ended up in Alaska in a bus, and unfortunately he ate some mushrooms, I think, and died, and his family tracked him down, and they saw his hair sticking out the top of a sleeping bag, and they thought they found him, but it was just a rotting corpse. And I just didn't want my children to find me as that. So,
right.
So I'd come down into town, I had enough money to buy a pie, and that was it. That's all I had in the world.
So was it like the day you came to Raglan?
That was, yeah, I came down and I sat, I think you can see it from here, in the chair outside the supermarket. I bought a pie, head down, hoodie up, cold, very cold this time of year. And I just heard a voice. Someone said, "Pete, is that you?" And it was, I didn't know who it was, but apparently, I used to own a fish and chip shop in Tyree.
Okay.
And I'd fed him there once when he had no money. And he took me to his home. He was a drug addict, trying to get off of the government-funded drugs.
Yeah.
Which, but it wasn't pleasant living in a drug addict's house. But it was a start, you know.
It was warmer than outside.
Yeah. I didn't stay there long, but yeah, that was the start of my sort of coming back into the world. And and I've been journeying ever since.
So what had happened to? Because you mentioned the mental health system, and you were escaping from it. It was your word.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. So 2001, I went to a friend of mine, doctor. I was very depressed. I'd come to New Zealand to marry the woman I loved. Left my home, my family, everything, my culture, but long story short, I basically married my mother-in-law, and I was depressed because of that, you know, and I had no one to talk to. I didn't have many friends here, and so I went to my friend doctor. He sent me to a psychiatrist. Within minutes, I was on antidepressants. Just smashed my mind to bits. And
so was that like as soon as you took them that you had problems?
Within a week, I started to see colour again. I started to taste food. I thought, oh, this is all right.
Right.
Within 2 weeks, no sleep. My mind was racing. It was terrifying, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't sleep. I hadn't slept for weeks.
Do you remember which particular drug?
Oh, I've been on so many.
Right, it's just right. Okay,
it's all a blur.
There's more to come. Yeah.
Oh, crikey. So then they stopped the medication. My depression was 10 times worse than it had ever been. And then they eventually said, "Oh, Pete, it's nothing to worry about. You're bipolar. You'll most likely be on medication your rest of life. It's just a chemical imbalance." And I actually left the Menarche Centre in Thames. I was elated. Now we know what it is. We can do the test and get it sorted. And the trouble is, there is no test. There is no chemical imbalance. It's just a myth made up. I come to that conclusion.
Well, no, that has been shown. They've tried to prove, like what I've read, they've tried to prove that there's a chemical imbalance, but they have failed to prove it.
They've tried to prove it, and they'll never prove it.
Because there's no such thing.
It doesn't exist. And the conclusion I come to, and it wasn't a quick conclusion, because then after that, it was try this, try that. Oh, we'll find the right balance, and lithium, and oh man, just horror upon horror, and
right.
I was just a dribbling zombie, you know.
So were you in an institution?
No, I did end up in Waikato Hospital many years later.
So where were you? You had a place over in Thames?
In Tyree. At one point, I had 4 homes, businesses, cars, boats, 3 children, wife, and lost all of that.
Really?
And because of the label of bipolar, because they have no cure in their mind, it cannot be cured. And still now, and I found out last week actually. Apparently, I've got a police file with bipolar on it.
Right.
And my son's life's been affected by it. I only found this out last week. I'm now connecting with my son 10 years on.
Right.
And he's seen now my in-laws' family that tried to have me committed. He's seen them for what they are. They tried to have me committed because I left their daughter, and I had a huge spiritual awakening, and that's a book in itself, and that book's been written, so it's going to be a good one.
So how was the spiritual awakening interpreted by the psychiatrists?
Well, I never spoke to them about it.
Oh, really?
Because I knew if I told them what I was experiencing, I'd be called psychotic or whatever, so I didn't. I just walked away, and the trouble is my in-laws couldn't accept that, and they tried to have me committed when I came back.
So you tried to walk away from the psychiatrist and the medication at that point?
We can touch on it if you like. We could talk all day. I'd happily do that.
Yeah, I know.
We've got a sort of bullet point today.
Yeah.
So what happened to me, the spiritual awakening, a friend of mine was a beautiful friend, used to play for the All Whites.
Yeah.
You know, play soccer for New Zealand. He was dying of cancer. And he was told in his 20s that he had 3 years to live, and I knew him at the age of 45. He'd taken the spiritual path, and he went to a healer in Brazil named John of God, and the name put me off a bit because of my Catholic upbringing.
Right.
But he told me things that he witnessed and seen and how it impacted his life, and he didn't bullshit. He was a good one, you know. So a couple of years later, John of God and his crew came to Wellington. So partly to support my friend, but also partly for my journey, I went and went down there. And again, long story short, I went into a room where how it works is his supporters meditate and just channel, I'll say love for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And they harness it and use that for healing. And I was very sceptical of the whole thing, but shit, you know, the food was good, so I went.
Right.
And but I walked into the room. They called it the energy room, I think. Doesn't matter. And as I opened the door, it was like somebody hit me with a baseball bat in my heart, and this energy just poured through me. And I just stayed in that room for 3 days. And at the end of that, there was no mental illness. My head was clear, my mind was clear. I stopped taking medication that day, but I had to lie to my family because you're not allowed to stop medication. You know, so, and from that day on, there was no mental illness. It was just, and then.
So how long ago would this have been, roughly?
This would have been about 12 years ago,
okay, yep.
Something like that.
Yep.
And then later on, I was MC at the Food and Wine Festival in Tyrrell. And I met a gentleman, we had a really good connection. We said we'd catch up afterwards. And at the end of it, I saw him, I thought he was leaving, he was packing up his amp and stuff. And I ran over to him, and as he turned, a book fell out of his arms onto the floor in front of me called A Course in Miracles. And because of the things that were happening in my life, the synchronicities and the visions. And, I said, what's this about? He said, I've no idea. He said, somebody just gave it to me and said, you know it's for. I said, I think it might be for me.
Right.
And he agreed and he gave it to me. And about 3 months later, I met a lady that works at A Course in Miracles Institute in Wisconsin. And,
okay.
It's all stuff I'd never heard of. I mean, I'm a working boy from London. I knew nothing of anything spiritual. There's nothing spiritual.
I'm vaguely aware of that phrase, A Course in Miracles, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, well, I opened it to read, and it was like, ooh, don't know.
Yeah.
It's pretty. It's a powerful document, but it's you have to plough through it. So I didn't. I just put it under the bed, and I'd flick through it every now and then, but it really didn't speak to me. But a few months later, this lady, long story, but we just crossed paths, and she, her job at A Course in Miracles Institute was to meditate 5 hours a day and turn to light and energise the whole institute. And after 5 months of doing that, her body was absolutely shot to bits. So they nursed her back to health, and then she just walks the earth teaching unconditional love. And her and I met. And just standing in front of her, my whole body started to vibrate, and from that day on, visions, synchronicities, and I just knew A Course in Miracles. My mind had expanded so much, it was, yeah.
So how do you explain visions to people who, most of our cultures feels like that's a bit odd?
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't. So yeah, again, fast tracking, actually, I think I might have. I was in Raglan and I just woke up. This is later on, a few years later. I woke up one morning just knowing that I was going to Fiji. I was used to use my last money in the world to buy art supplies and face paints and just go to Fiji. And beyond that, I didn't know, you know. So I went, and incredible story what happened over there. And I just went into the villages and did face paints with the kids, and before you knew it, there was children climbing all over me, and just the whole village just swirling around me. And I realised then that there's nothing wrong with me. It was just the society I was trying to live in. And
right, and you found that out by going into a different society.
Different culture, simple people living village life.
Yeah.
There is no mental illness. There is no. Everyone has their place in the village, their place in the world. They know where they belong. I'll say there's no mental illness. That was 10 years ago. And but getting back to the question, I would talk to them about my dreams and visions, and over there the old people showed themselves to me, and I didn't know what they looked like. But when I explained to the village elders what I'd seen, they said that's how they've been told the old people looked, you know, and it was huge afros and like upside down conical afros and painting on their face, everything, and they showed, and it's the same thing has happened to me in Hawaii.
So can I ask, how does a vision happen?
Well, for me, I can only speak from my perspective, although I've spoken to a lot of people, and most of them are in the mental health system that are telling me these things, and they're terrified to talk about them. It's happening more and more. So there's two ways. One, it can just be a quick flash in your everyday life. You'll just get it happened here, and it's happened a lot actually. But I was driving into town one day, and I just saw this quick flash of like a gazebo. It was, and it was just so quick. But I've learned to notice these things.
Yeah.
Everyone has them. Little deja vu. Everybody has them.
Right.
It's just in our society we're either generally too busy, or we just don't know what's happening, or we don't recognise it. Or...
Yeah.
So anyway, I had this vision of a gazebo, and it's just a little thing. And I was going around the corner just down by the waterfront here, by the toilet block, and there was the gazebo that I'd seen. So I pulled in there, and I just asked the gentleman there if there's anyone I could stay, and he offered me to stay the night. And yeah, the stories he started to tell me that, you know, I get guided around the world by these dreams, by these visions, as does the lady from the Course in Miracles. That's how she lives, you know, and I'm meeting more and more people that do this. But yeah, in Fiji, they say I have the gift. That's their wording for it, the gift.
Right.
I met this time with the theology professor at the University of South Pacific, and talked to him about what I'm seeing. At first I asked him what a theology professor does, and he's all his life has studied religions, and trying to find a core truth, or you know, but he's still stuck in religion, and he called me a mystic.
Right.
That was his wording, and I said, well, what's that to you? And he explained, and he said, all religions have mystics, and I said, what, even the Catholic? He said, yeah, Catholic Church. But the thing is, I'm not stuck in religion. I've moved beyond it. I was christened a Catholic and all the old bollocks. And a big part of the peak delete was deleting all that program.
Right.
Fear and
So, folks, we're talking to poet Pete Delete. That's your poet name. I thought I'd just mention that.
Yeah.
So if anyone's tuned in halfway through, what are we talking about here? It sounds really interesting and different.
So I do a poem.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, this is, it's not my latest, but it's fairly recent. I think it's the last one in the book. It's not the last, but anyway, it's called I Live Now. And it goes, I live now where the teardrops dwell. I've lived down the layers, my mind's living hell. I've stared down the demons chased since a boy. I live now in the place, kept safe, my joy. I've hand-fed the monster beneath my bed. I've silenced the screams within my head. I've walked alone, barefoot, broken glass. I live now in the place, kept safe, love at last. I live now in the place where angels sing, where poets rhyme, and God awaits all, for all of time.
And so when did you write that one?
About a month ago. Actually, in Fiji, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in Fiji for a month. But,
okay.
Yeah, so...
So I didn't mean to interrupt the flow, but I just thought people need to know who we're talking to. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So you touched on like the mental health system, and it's quite clear you have a pretty negative view of you based on your experiences in it in New Zealand.
No, I have nothing but positivity for the mental health, and they did what the Catholic Church couldn't do. They broke me. And at that point, I had to go in search of who I am. You know?
But it's not entirely a compliment to
Probably
say they broke you. That's probably not what they were looking, not what they said they wanted to do.
No. Yeah, guys. Yeah, no, I've learned, again, the Pete Delete part, I've learned to reprogram my mind totally. It was smashed to bits. 7 years ago, probably, I was driving to Raglan. I left Taranaki because of all the nonsense that happened there, because somebody found out that I'd been labelled. Nothing I ever did. I actually started Taranaki softcore.
Yeah.
Down there they've got Taranaki hardcore.
Yes.
And I was starting to talk about suicide to try and shift this epidemic of youth suicide and anyway, but I had to leave, but I was so confused, and I was in my van driving. I knew before I died I had to get back to my kids on the command, and I was about an hour outside Raglan. I had to stop. I didn't know who I was, where I was. It was it's beyond terrifying, you know. And you can't put that in words, but that was the point. I had to start reprogramming my mind. You know, it's just every thought now, every word, every action that comes out of my mouth, I monitor, and if it's not a loving thought, a loving action, I just delete it and change it. You know, so I don't have any animosity towards the mental health system because that anger only hurts me, and I don't do that anymore.
Right.
But what I'm about it's about changing. You know, I read a story about somebody in the French resistance that got into the factory where they made the bearings for their tanks, the Germans' tanks.
Yeah.
And he put grit in the bearings for the grease.
Right.
And he brought the whole German army to a standstill with a pocket full of grit.
Right.
And I am that grit. You know, I'm going to do what I
see.
can to get in there. You can't go to war with these pharmaceuticals. They're too big, too powerful, they think. But on my blog, I'm starting to get a bit of support, and I'll just do whatever I can. And the best way I can do that is to be the most famous artist and poet on earth. And that's my intention.
That's your intention?
That's the vision I have, you know. Because in the mental health system, they convinced me that my art and poetry was a symptom of my mental illness.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's on fire.
So you were writing poems,
Yeah.
and the psychiatrist saw these.
No, I never saw them.
Oh, they just knew that you were doing it.
Heard. So what happened? Back then, I was still in the system, and these poems were coming. I didn't understand what was going on in my life. You know, I knew these poems. They're actually instructions for me.
Yeah.
To reprogram my mind, and that 10-year journey in poetry is reprogram my mind from absolute fear to love. But I would talk of these poems, and they convinced they were symptoms of psychosis or whatever the label they want to give it. So I just stopped talking about it. And the poems were in a box for probably 7-8 years, and I nearly threw them away many times because they'd convinced me it was a symptom, you know.
Right.
But I didn't throw them away. And,
To most people, that sounds just a little bit ridiculous. That, I mean, creative output, we all know is good for us to have creative output. It's a really important part of being a human and a part of our growth and development. Yeah. But the psychiatrist said it was a symptom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and should be medicated to stop that. Yeah. Good.
Wow. So I mean, you also said to me before you went on the air that they gave you electroshock therapy.
Yeah. So my mind was so smashed to bits. They convinced me that,
and this is from the drugs.
It's from the drugs, but more from the loss of my family, my home, my businesses, my wife, my money, and you know, trying to live in a car that you couldn't afford to run, and trying to process that lot, and knowing you couldn't go into the mental health system because there was no help there.
So, what would you have been like if I'd run into you on the street and tried to strike up a conversation with you?
I'd learned all my life. I'd learned to put on a facade. You know, all my life I'd run away from suicidal depression, but I managed to function in the world. You know, I had to join your business and build a house at the age of 28.
Okay, but even at this point, just before they gave you the electroshock therapy, you said your mind was smashed to bits. So
you wouldn't have seen me on the street.
Okay, that's right. You were kind of hiding.
Yeah, I had to. Yeah, I just couldn't keep that facade up any longer.
Okay, and what was the electroshock therapy supposed to do for you?
Reset. This is what I was, you know, my mind was just mush, you know, so I just believed what they said, that it would actually just sort of reset the button or something, and it didn't. It made it 1,000 times worse.
So can I ask, do you remember the actual experience of it happening?
So you go under general anaesthetic.
Okay.
So you don't remember that.
Yeah, well, you see these things dramatised on TV, so it looks...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, my mum had... And this was another factor. My mum had electric shock therapy in the 60s, and I was terrified of ending up like her, you know, as a kid. Right. As my mind started to unravel. Shit. So I thought... But all my mum had to do was kick my dad out and sort her life out. And that's all I needed to do in 2001 was leave my marriage, sort my life out. But because my whole life was in New Zealand with my wife, 3 children, homes, I was fearful of losing all of that. So I went for medications. Yeah. So my mum now is the most happy gentle, kind person you can imagine. You know.
So is she in the UK?
In London, yeah, I'll be seeing her Monday.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's her 81st birthday. So.
Yeah. So you're I mean, folks, you've all heard Pete talking. You hear he's perfectly lucid and
Yeah.
you know, not
It's all
likely to
fun.
go do.
Don't believe a word.
Yeah. So obviously, it's you've had some real lows in your life, but you've come back out of it. How would you? Well, just before we go, what would you suggest? So for someone in your situation where you said you lost your family and your business and all that, what would be rather than the drug?